Infinity is an original novel written and performed by Mark Yoshimoto Nemcoff. It contains mature themes, profanity, and violence. I watch people in the world throw away their lives lusting after things never able to satisfy their desires, falling into deeper despair and torturing themselves. Even if they get what they want, how long will they be able to enjoy it? For one heavenly pleasure, they suffer 10 torments of hell, binding themselves more firmly to the grindstone. Such people are like monkeys, grasping frantically for the moon in the water, then falling into a whirlpool. How endlessly those caught up in the floating world suffer. Despite myself, I fret over them all night and cannot staunch my flow of tears. Taigu Ryokan, born 1758, died 1831. Prologue. Forever, the din arose, bringing with it the inevitable. The red Mercedes continued in reckless haste, bounding with insanity across the tripled northbound lanes of Pacific Coast Highway. Ian Augustine refused to lose them. When his targets accelerated to 70, he punched the gas of his black BMW 3 Series, closing the distance. Pedal down, his slalom swerve between a white Suburban and a beater pickup truck gained him the slightest bit of ground. The tingle in the back of his head was hot. "I've got you," Ian thought. "Today you're going back to hell." Beach mansions whizzed by on the left. To the right there was nowhere to go but up into the Santa Monica Mountains. The man driving the Mercedes stole glances at his wife's panicked face. Turning off on any of those side roads would have made it easier to be caught. The light off-season traffic was in their favor. With luck, they would lose their pursuer by putting cars between him and them. Ian pulled a Sig Sauer P245 from the glove box, full clip, ready for close encounters. He snapped off the safety and dropped the barrel down into the cup holder. Not getting away this time. They'd given him the slip before. It had been one of the hottest days of summer, and he had tracked them to a farm outside of Ithaca, New York. The pair had worked the entire East Coast as psychotherapists, convincing simple everyday people that they had been the victims of childhood molestation by members of the clergy. Over 41 lawsuits had been brought. As expert witnesses for the plaintiffs, they would testify to the horrors their patients continued to suffer because of the cruelty of these so-called men of faith. Nightmares, nervous breakdowns, depression and anxiety.
Authority and power enable predators such as these to coerce the victims, in these cases children, into doing things for dominance, sexual gratification, or mostly both.
Dr. Rainier would iterate to terrified juries while he cleaned his glasses. Addiction, dissociative states, gastrointestinal distress. The symptoms were myriad. The punishment should fit the crime. The settlements bankrupted the church, but it was mostly the suicides the doctor and his wife were after. One Monsignor, guilty of only steering troubled boys in the right direction, cut his wrists with a sliver of broken mirror. Another had swallowed enough drain cleaner to liquefy his insides until he died screaming. The 2 or 3 priests who had actually been guilty of something had also taken their lives.
The more, the merrier,
Dr. Rainier told his wife Kana as they toasted their success. In the cellar of their farmhouse, they told Ian, at gunpoint, about the things that would happen to his family. Even his parents, both many years in the grave, would be dug up, their bodies defiled.
"I'll sip soup out of your mother's skull,"
hissed Rainier. In the ensuing scuffle, the couple escaped. It was weeks before Ian located them again. There was no way these two were escaping this time. The two cars shared abandon. The red Mercedes blew through a red light. Ian followed. Lanes were wide open. Their speedometers made it to 80. The Mercedes throttled up fast. Ian accelerated in turn, gaining. Shoot them at close range. Get away. Dump the car. Leave town, he thought. Just like he'd been trained. Just like he'd done countless times before. In the name of the Church of Infinity. Ahead, the 3 lanes became 2. Bottleneck. Ian knew he could get them. Until the red Mercedes swerved into oncoming traffic, head on, into the southbound lanes. Some bitch! Ian smashed his palm against the steering wheel in frustration. Grabbing the shifter, he switched the BMW from automatic to manual transmission and dropped it from 5th gear to 4th. The car rocketed ahead, revving up into the red as it crossed the double yellow line. He barely missed the black Honda blaring its horn at him. He swerved back into the northbound lanes to avoid a school bus. The red Mercedes was getting away. For a second time, he jumped the dividing line. A heart-stopping near miss with a minivan cost the red Mercedes speed, and Ian was in position again. He downshifted once more, the entire engine screaming as it redlined. Within seconds, he was right on their tail. If he could catch the back corner of their bumper, he could pit maneuver them off the road. Just a little bit more, a little further. He cut left at the same time as his prey, and they blocked his advance. Ian juked right, but they matched him move for move. A bread truck came directly toward them, the driver hitting his horn intermittently as if delivering frantic bursts of Morse code. The 2 speeding cars evaded to the left. Seeing his opening, Ian cranked the wheel right, entering the space the bread truck had just passed through. The Mercedes slowed momentarily because of a green SUV coming toward it. Ian knew this was a small miracle. In mere seconds, he was next to the Mercedes, his Sig Sauer pointed out his driver's side window. As if time had slowed to a crawl, Ian could clearly see both driver and passenger, an old man and the woman, their expressions full of terror as they spotted his gun. Once he pulled the trigger and the bullets ripped into their mortal bodies, Ian finally caught a glimpse of their true faces. To his horror, they looked very human. The dead man slumped over the wheel. The Mercedes drifted out of control, first smashing door to door into Ian's BMW, before ricocheting headfirst into a guardrail. The sheer force of the crash lifted the back right wheel of the Mercedes off the ground. The rest of the car followed as it traveled up and over at an angle, hitting the rocks below as it fell. Desperately, Ian fought against the steering wheel of his car to regain control before it fishtailed too far and followed the Mercedes. They weren't demons. In Ian's mind, he saw their faces again and could not escape the thought that he had made a terrible mistake. What have I done? It was the sudden and distinct blast of an air horn that brought his eyes forward to the 18-wheeler barreling down upon him. The truck grill's grinning face bloomed larger and larger. The accelerated rate of closure caused its unchanging gape to fill the windshield with the visage of death. The 18-wheeler's horn quickly blanketed the air. Ian felt it shake him from head to toe. Momentarily, his gaze jerked upward, away from the oncoming grille of the truck, to the rearview mirror. Those dark blue orbs staring back did not correspond with his physiological responses. The hurricane swell buffeting his mind, the tense feeling in his chest, the white knuckles on the steering wheel. Instantly, he knew the moment to pull away had come and gone. He was past the point of no return. Even if he could turn the wheel and change his trajectory, something told him it wouldn't make a difference. And he braced for impact. Part 1. Ian never forgot the day he discovered the book. A dozen years earlier, before he had become a mercenary, he had been something else entirely. Something that felt as empty as a hole in the sky. As usual, the day began after another night of tossing and turning. The things that visited his mind in the dark were never kind. Ping, ping, ping. It was an eerie sound. Ping, ping, like sonar calling from the depths of his twilight. Through the slightly open window, someone in the building behind his was tuning a piano at 6 a.m. Ian sat at the edge of the futon bed inside the tiny, sparsely decorated studio apartment. He rubbed his face with his palms before squeezing the bridge of his nose between the pads of both middle fingers. The static inside his head seemed louder than usual, which troubled him. He had exercises to keep the static at bay. Closing his eyes, he tried to imagine the puppy his father had given him before telling Ian about being diagnosed with terminal cancer by 2 different doctors. His father intended that the puppy be the best friend to Ian that he wouldn't have time to be. Shortly after his dad passed, his mom was forced to move to a worse part of town. Some bullies stomped and kicked his little dog to death. Ian avoided thinking about the latter part. Trying to remember the dog's face calmed him. He shut his eyes harder against the static and attempted to recall the feeling of the puppy's small tongue eagerly licking his face. But the din was too loud and kept the memory from surfacing. He let out an exasperated sigh and knew that any attempt to push harder would also bring up those memories better left buried. These unkind memories were locked inside the vault of his mind, which hid most of his whole life. They were never to be thought of. He had come to Boston to hide and forget. But forgetting was not easy for Ian. He had been hospitalized. They had done something to his brain, and for a while he remembered nothing. There were no bad dreams. There were no sleepless nights. Mostly, there was no static. By the end, forgetting was hard. He remembered everything, especially the worst parts. The static came back. But it made Ian think there was possibly something slightly beyond the static, but reaching it would be like swimming too far from shore. As the treatments he had suffered at the hands of self-professed men of medicine wore off, he needed to find ways to distract himself. His life earning minimum wage washing dishes at a cafe near Kendall Square offered 0 mental stimuli. As far as Ian was concerned, it was numbing his brain into mush. Opening the drawer of the nightstand, Ian touched his pistol, a cheap .22 caliber. He imagined the familiar feeling of the barrel against his temple moments before he placed it there. After letting out a long exhale, he put the gun back and closed the drawer. Like most days prior, he divined the strength to go headfirst into another day without knowing why. Overhead, the cold gray slate of Boston's late winter skies ensured gloom on those below. Downing another large gulp of chocolate milk from the cardboard container, Ian exited the store 24 on the corner. He checked the cash in his pocket. A 10 and 6 singles. A quick glance at the watch on his wrist revealed it was 10 to 7. He was already late. No time for the bus. No choice. Ian flagged a cab despite knowing it would cost him most of his $16. A square-jawed businessman stepped off the curb to steal the taxi, but backed away when he met Ian's stare. The look in Ian's eyes, unstable and emotionally distant, compelled the businessman to take the mulligan. If asked nicely, Ian would have let the stranger take the cab, even if he did think the man looked like an asshole. They were easy to spot, Ian often thought. Self-absorbed drones whose sense of self-worth could only be derived by the overall value of their possessions. Assholes cared what kind of car you drove or what brand your earbuds were. Some days he'd see more Boston assholes than a Beacon Hill proctologist. Robot, Ian thought, watching the line of businessmen on the sidewalk on the other side of his cab window. Inside he carried the deathly fear of becoming one. Most of Ian's life had been spent as an outsider, trying to remain inconspicuous. Then the bad things happened, things that fractured his humanity, things that sliced him up inside like the jagged edges of a broken bottle. He had killed. Most of those memories had been expunged at the hospital, that part of his history, taking lives of those who had wronged him, including the 2 bullies who had coldly snapped his whimpering puppy's spine, was behind him like a past life gone to rest. No longer did their faces haunt the dark. His escape into the anonymity that cloaked him from notice essentially made him nobody. He lived like a ghost. He kept no bank account, no credit cards. His cell phone used only prepaid minutes. But the anonymity took its toll because it offered no future. Living paycheck to paycheck with no direction in life made him feel like there was less and less of him every day. And now the static was going to eat him alive. The cab pulled up to the front of the diner 2 minutes after 7. Ian surrendered the $10 bill. 35 cents was all he could afford to tip anyway. He tried sneaking in the back, through the kitchen door. He ignored the buzzsaw stare from the cafe's owner as she looked up from the grill and crossed toward the dishes already piling up.
"I'm warning you," she said. "If I wasn't too damn busy to hire someone new."
Her words meant nothing to Ian. She paid him in cash. Besides, he thought she still owed him. One time a gangbanger had come in waving a knife trying to rob the place before Ian bum-rushed the guy through the kitchen and beat him into unconsciousness in the alley. The cops never pressed any charges. As it often does, word got out about the lunatic dishwasher. A rumor started that Ian was some kind of ex-soldier come back from the front lines with a head full of broken parts. If that's what people wanted to believe, and it meant he was left alone, Ian didn't care. So he went to work, scrubbing pots and hosing down plates, scraping wasted half-eaten meals down the drain. Not once in 2 hours did he look up from the sink. After the morning rush, Laurent, the busboy, a lanky 19-year-old with jailhouse tattoos, took a breather to shoot the shit.
"What's the game today, psycho?"
"It's called Dead Relatives," Ian replied. "It's all about who you would pick if you could save only one, your kid or your spouse, your dog, or your mother."
"Why can't you save both?"
"It's not how it works." Ian tried to keep his annoyance from becoming apparent. He knew it was just a stupid game. "You have only seconds to act," he said, "or both will die. You have to pick one."
"You're fucked in the melon, Ian. You know that."
Of course he did. He was more aware of it than anybody he knew.
"Yo, spot me at Jackson till payday?"
asked Laurent. Ian realized the true nature of his visit. "Sorry, I'm Tap City."
"Government tell me I should just be happy to have a job. Give me a break. I'm starting to think that all that bullshit you always talk about the government trying to eliminate the middle class ain't bullshit after all."
Laurent shook his head as Ian stacked the pots.
"Thing is, I just don't even know why I give a rat's ass about no middle class. They don't stand up for poor folks like they used to."
Ian wiped his hands on a food-spotted dish towel. "Protest is dead, my friend. Middle-class outrage only happens on the internet." Laurent chuffed.
"You imagine what kind of world this would be if instead of doing something about it, Rosa Parks just went to the back of the bus and then posted on Facebook about how pissed off she was?"
"And you don't think the powers that be like us complacent?" asked Ian.
"Ha! You one paranoid motherfucker!"
Laurent chuckled before walking away. After lunch, Laurent took a break. Ian was told to fill in and bust tables. He grabbed the gray plastic dish tub and did his duty. While dragging a damp rag across a tabletop, he spotted something left behind on a chair. Albeit designed, it was pure chance that Ian Augustine discovered a well-thumbed paperback volume of Ronagy's First Book of Infinity. The person who left it behind had done so purposely, intending that someone, anyone, find the text. A simple design, to be sure. There were millions of copies of this tome seeded around the world. Thus the trick of the first book was not in its discovery, but rather in the culmination of a secondary and much more difficult search. Only 100 pages in length, a mere 25,000 words, the entire text was penned in second person, with a single statement per line. Ian, anxious for a respite from sanitizing tables, cracked open the book and began to read. For one destined to become a falconer, The sum of the book's total message was encapsulated in a single sentence. The words exploded behind Ian's eyeballs like fire. Earth is heaven for demons. Over and over, he read the section that preceded the incendiary sentence. The compass spins, a ship adrift, tossed in unyielding seas. You cannot find safety because you do not know the way. Any course taken is speculation, one of endless choices, some beyond the scope of what you can see with your eyes. Your perception is so primitive. Your resources are limited. Like the oil of a lamp forced to stay lit, hope dwindles the longer you are lost, eventually leaving only helplessness. Desperation follows in the night, claiming all sanity. Despair is evil's exploit. The greatest truth of all is mankind's weakness. You must understand this. Earth is heaven for demons. The book had kept him up past 3 a.m., at which point he fell into a fitful slumber. Shaken from bed by the alarm, Ian shuffled across the floor of his apartment and opened the fridge door. What little was left of the quart of chocolate milk went down his throat in a thin trickle. The water he splashed in his face did little more than wash the sleep from his dark blue eyes. Ian ran a hand through his black hair, trying to summon the mask needed to get through another day. As he gazed at his own reflection in the mirror, he realized something remarkable. The static had vanished. It was only the enigmatic phrase from the first book of Infinity that lingered, embedded in his mind like a tick. Earth is heaven for demons. At first he believed it was just a trick of the forced perspective of second-person prose, like gazing upon an unpleasant blemish in the mirror against one's will. He took to the streets to think. Ian was used to it by now. The mere act of ambulation triggered his impulse of reflection. There had always been an inkling of sorts, one that, for a time in his youth, led him to believe he was born special. But his childhood had been robbed from him, and that feeling died, along with his father. Ian's feet pounded the sidewalk. He swigged from his small carton of chocolate milk. There was no doubt he could feel something gestating, something long dormant inside of him. His feet took him all the way down to the commons. Along the pathways he saw more drones, properly attired office workers buzzing all too loudly on their cell phones, fools who believed their brief respite from the hive equaled some kind of independence. Ian knew he could never be like these people, cogs in a great machine destined to turn in place until worn out and thrown away. As a boy, he had been drawn to stories of secret societies and phenomena that could not be explained, an interest quashed by the disapproving and abusive hand of a stepfather he hated. Such drivel offended the old man's sensibilities. Unlike his real father, his stepdad loathed science fiction, calling it a subversive liberal tool that only helped children foster a complete distrust of authority. However, what Ian mostly found of interest was science fact. As a boy, he had been sure these alternate worlds he read about truly existed, though the constant beatings and cruel verbal harassment by his stepfather had put that interest on the wane. Until now. Earth is heaven for demons. Days passed and the message germinated, fostering a maddening desire to delve deeper into what the author meant. Thus finding the second book of Infinity came as the result of a deliberate search. In it, the author Ranaji addressed who exactly were these demons. Hell exists, the name adopted by a dimension parallel to our own. It is a barren world, a world without law, a violent world where every being struggles for survival. There are denizens of this plane who have gained the ability to enter our dimension from their own. Demons. Essentially humanoids imbued with additional matter manipulation and psychic abilities. Most demons know what they are. However, some believe they are earth-born beings. Others, caught in between this conceptual dichotomy, have gone insane. Demons have always walked among you right here on Earth. Existence of demons in our world goes back to the beginning of time. Their traits, those of temptation and torment, are responsible for the afterlife myths common to human spiritual thinking. Though many would like you to believe mortal man's evil sins will place him in hell, it is not true. Mankind cannot yet cross the dimensions into the other worlds. For humans, hell is but a condition of suffering that exists right here, in our own world. Yet we are too blind to see the cause. Demons destroy the lives of mortal humans for their own gain, and to deepen their hold upon our world, a hold that grows stronger. With each passing day, demons gain ever more control over the affairs of man. Traversing the busy sidewalks of Boylston Street, Ian could not help but look into the faces of all those who passed. A frigid wind cut through Boston, chilling him to the bone. But still he walked. Still he gazed. Above the scarf-lined mouths were eyes. Who or what resided behind each pair was what he attempted to find. Nevertheless, answers eluded him. He was going to be late for work. Turn around and go back, he thought. It's not too late. However, it was far beyond late. He could no longer turn back. Ian stopped in front of a massive stone edifice. Over a century old, the continuation of his journey required crossing its threshold. And inside the Boston Public Library, hidden deep within those venerated stacks, was where he found the third book of Infinity, an entire volume dedicated to the threat these demons proposed. You are prey for demons, because of how easily you can be seduced. In practice, demons thrive in our world simply because of its most basic quality. Earth is a place defined by worldly means. Demons exploit this vulnerability to place people like you in your own living hell. You who deserve it, whose souls are fully corrupted, are akin to low-hanging fruit. You live on the edge. You constantly teeter on the brink. As such, it takes very little effort for a demon to push you into a chasm of interminable chaos and endless torment. You must be vigilant. You must stop it from happening to yourself. Most importantly, you must stop it from happening to others. There was nothing awaiting Ian outside. He remained camped out in the library from morning until close. Buried deeper than the previous volumes, the fourth book of Infinity explained how demons pinpoint their prey. Does the call beckon to you? Do you heed its siren song? If so, demons will find you. Demons' highly acute senses and abilities to read human minds allow them to easily pinpoint followers of the call. A beacon that has a stronger pull on some humans. The call may not be the same for you as it is for another. It is different for all. Some hear voices. Some are bombarded by impulses and destructive thoughts. Almost always, the call will lure you by appealing to your greed and need for power. In many cases, those followers of the call even revel in the destruction they cause in their wake. Because the call often manifests itself within your sense of spite, your deep-seated desire to prove yourself worthy or right in the eyes of those who deny you. Once you have fully succumbed to the call, you are powerless to resist those demons who choose to control you. You are a pawn of their will and subject to their toxic whims. Ian wanted more. The craving pulsed through his veins. So far, Ranaji's claims had dealt only with the powers of darkness. It wasn't until the 5th book of Infinity where the prophet had changed gears. This tome would almost exclusively concern itself with the vast indifference of heaven. Yes, angels exist, though they are far more rare than demons, and our worldly plane holds much less interest to them. Those that are here, and know of their angelic status, conspicuously feel that it is their duty to alleviate what suffering they can before Armageddon destroys the earth. Most angels spend their existence attempting to find and mitigate those human minds most ripe for possession by subduing their immoral and aggressive tendencies. By reaching out to those most vulnerable to the call, angels attempt to show them peace and grant them access to the light. A serenity that makes one immune to the charms of demons, a calm that inspires confidence and hope. It is a precious and rare revelation. But do not expect the hand of divine intervention to protect you. Do not expect the light to prevent the destructive influence of demons upon you. Most people are partially corrupt. As such, angels very rarely will give specific aid. They fear a butterfly effect, afraid that if they help you escape death today, tomorrow you may invent the nuclear bomb or become the carrier of plague. But it is the influence of these few angels that ultimately shields most humans from the destruction demons want to wreak upon this world. They bear for us a fragile peace between their world and hell. It is not known by man how long that peace will last, or how much longer heaven will protect us. Because once heaven's watchful eye has gone away, we will be at the mercy of demons, who see humans only as a commodity. We will be lost. The compass spins, a ship adrift, tossed in violent seas. Ian flipped the page, wanting more, but found only a blank sheet awaiting him. There in the lower corner, someone had scrawled in faded pen, "Where is the rest? Where did these demons come from?" The abrupt ending to the 5th book of Infinity left Ian feeling hollow. He spent days searching the stacks for more of the message, but it was nowhere to be found. He couldn't find a single person who knew of it, who could help him on his search. Even his hours spent combing the internet turned up nothing but false leads and dead ends. For Ian, the scribbled missive found at the end of Book 4 resonated louder than the other questions firing rapidly in his mind. Where did these demons come from? It was getting late, and he had no choice but to leave the library and quit for the night. Back in his apartment, he gazed at the ceiling for hours, unable to sleep. By daybreak, he sat bleary-eyed at the edge of his bed. Carton of chocolate milk in hand, he picked up the phone. Library after library denied that they had the book, that they had the possible answer. It was as if he had fallen into a black hole. Finally, he contacted the Library of Congress, which reignited the search. Packing a bag, he jumped on a Bolt bus headed south down I-95 to Washington, D.C. There he found the 6th book of Infinity. The hardback tome appeared to be at least a half-century old. Unlike Ranaji's previous writings, this one seemed more like a history lesson. In the beginning, there was only a single plane of existence, one that in many ways mirrored our own dimension long before we existed. Then came a vast devastation, an apocalyptic event, one that all but wiped out everything, causing a rift massive enough to fracture a once fertile ancient world into 2 separate dimensions, hell and heaven. It was this event that created a new world, one overlapping heaven and hell, That new world was the Earth. These planes are just 3 of many that exist in the same space, concentric spheres invisible to each other and unnoticed by nearly all who inhabit them, including you, especially you. Ian spent a sleepless night on the street, watching his breath fog before his eyes while his teeth chattered in the frigid air. The final lines of the 6th book flashed repeatedly in his mind. He waited outside for the Library of Congress to open in the morning. His exhaustion weighed heavily upon him. After he registered for a pass and tracked down the book, all fatigue vanished completely once his fingers touched the spine of the 7th volume. The fear created inside him by the other books had caused him to wonder what could be done. The 7th book of Infinity chipped away at Hell's weaknesses. The remains of that long devastated world is the place from where demons come. Many believe Hell is a realm of limitless power, one with full legions of demon soldiers at its disposal. But that is exactly what they want us to think. Contrary to popular conception, the dimension of Hell is nothing of the sort. Hell is a barren world full of famine and starvation, a blasted and dying wasteland. It is only through thievery from the human world that Hell is even able to exist. Hell is our destructive foil. It feeds off our dimension, taking from us our most precious resources. With its genesis, Earth became the plane of physical creation, robbing heaven and hell of any ability to develop technology. This is why it is so important for demons to steal from those on Earth and to possess minds. With a bit of luck, he had been able to track down the 8th book of Infinity in a private collection just outside of Dallas, Texas. The owner, an elderly woman with a face like parchment, greeted him as if he had been expected. She gave him 2 hours alone to examine the thin, antiquated book. Held within its pages were the seeds of hope, a way to alter the tide. Those who control the reins of power in Hell know the future will bring change. The imperialistic force of heaven, so embedded into the conscience of earthly humans, will lose sway. Eventually, heaven's watch over this plane will expire. When that time comes, the forces of Hell will mount a full-scale invasion and leave their dying dimension behind. The date of Armageddon has not yet been written, but do not be fooled. It is approaching. The arrival of the end of the mortal world accelerates with every passing day you allow these demons to walk the earth and corrupt those all around you. As he left, the old woman pushed a piece of paper into his hand. The shaky geriatric scrawl contained an address several states away, along with a cryptic message. Find all 10 books. Inside an envelope handed to him was cash for bus fare and food. Before he could refuse, she shut the door in his face and threw the lock. The journey to Phoenix, Arizona took 2 days. As he approached the location, Ian double-checked the old lady's handwriting and furrowed his brow. It was a cemetery. He could feel the rust against the skin of his palms as he shook the locked gate. There was no caretaker to be found, though from what Ian could see, the grounds appeared recently manicured. Checking over his shoulder, he scaled the wrought iron fence. His chest tightened with an indefinite sense of dread when his feet hit the ground. Carefully, he stalked through the rows of headstones. Ahead, he spotted a mausoleum. His feet picked up the pace. He knew this is why he came. Simple, squarish, unadorned. Above the doorway, the name Ranaji was engraved deep into the stone. The iron gate, to Ian's surprise, was unlocked. Heavily glassed small portals in the roof, each no bigger in circumference than a teacup, allowed a dozen pinpoints of sunlight to shine upon the plain rectangular sarcophagus. On top lay the book, The ninth book of Infinity, a manifesto for the radical steps necessary to save what was left of this dimension. Both the principles of heaven and hell, the opposing forces of the overarching divine principle, have since the beginning of their times viewed their stewardship as finite. It is bookended on one end by creation and the subsequent fall. On the other by Armageddon and the ensuing establishment of a new kingdom of hell on earth. Mankind will someday perish in a ball of fire. Those few men, women, and children allowed to survive Armageddon will be enslaved. But the Church of Infinity does not accept Armageddon as an inevitable occurrence. Neither should you. You can continue to add volumes and exceed the bookend principle entirely. But this can only occur if you eradicate those demons who endeavor each day to hasten Armageddon's arrival. Eradication by any means necessary. The 10th book of Infinity proved impossible to locate. There had been no more clues left inside Ranaji's mausoleum. The old woman in Dallas had disconnected her phone. Ian called his antiquated answering machine from a payphone. The temp agency that had placed him in his job at the diner had called a day earlier to tell him not to come by anymore, and his landlord said he was late on the rent. Ian deleted both messages. He knew there was no going back. After draining his meager bank account, he took a job as a dishwasher in a Greek restaurant. During his off hours, he worked the phones, calling every library and bookstore he could find. His brief boyhood sense that he was someone special had returned. A mental divining rod inside of him had come to life. Thanks to Ranaji, he felt a drive to somehow become complete. It was this last book that he was certain would make the final puzzle piece fall into place. If only I could find the damn thing, he thought after slamming down the phone for the 100th time. Weeks passed, and the specter of failure began to chip away at his resolve. He had only an inkling of how close he was. Though never one to consider himself a writer, one night he opened his notebook, the one hastily filled with scribbled thoughts, clues, and leads, and penned a pair of haikus. Life's path, shadow falls. My eye sees only darkness. Restless heart seeks sun. Journeys call to arms. To me, I fear truth beckons. Find its golden coin. Ian studied the duality of the haiku pair. It was as if he had snatched them from the ether. Another month passed before he finally tracked down what he was searching for at an antique bookseller in Seattle, Washington. Ian found the store off the beaten path, a handful of blocks from Pioneer Square, in the oldest part of town rebuilt after most of the city burnt down in a previous century. The faint jingle of the bell as he entered caused the clerk behind the register to look up. He was a kind-faced African-American man, but there was something behind his eyes that Ian could not dismiss. He felt it was almost sinister. The feeling quickly passed as the clerk shot Ian a smile. The clerk offered to help him find anything he was looking for, but after Ian asked about the 10th volume, the store's phone rang. The clerk could only point down one of the rows toward the back. Ian passed a man and woman down one aisle, and an academic-looking 20-something nearsightedly squinting at thick, aged volumes down another. On a shelf away from prying eyes, he found what he had traveled all this distance to locate. As his fingers reached for the book's spine, he could feel his heart hammer in his throat. When Ian picked up the tome, he realized it was far too heavy for its size. Holding it in his hands, before he drew the cover back, he knew what he was going to find. Despite the long and arduous journey he had taken to get here, something inside of Ian begged him to put it back and walk away. Even though he could see the images of himself in his head, reshelving the book, walking out of the store, Ian's hands were already in motion, flipping through page after page, all of which were blank. Until the book's center, which had been hollowed out, and held a pistol. Without thinking, Ian stuffed the gun into his pants and continued to flip through the book, reluctantly searching for more instructions. He hoped for some unlikely benign explanation. Ian was stunned when he reached the end of the book and all of its blank pages, and came across the inside of the back cover. Taped over the space on the reverse flap that normally holds the picture of the book's author was a Polaroid of a nondescript man. Neatly drawn in red ink over the man's face were crosshairs, as if Ian was looking at him through the scope of a gun. An address had been written on the back of the photo. The bus ride took little more than 2 hours. Knocking on the door and forcing his way into the house of the man in the photo took less than a minute, as did marching him down into the basement. This was all too familiar for Ian. While holding the weapon and knowing what he was about to do, he was re-entering territory he never thought he would tread upon again. The sins of his past ensured that he was quite capable of doing what was being asked of him. Slowly, his eyes adjusted to the low light and, along with his mind, focused on the gun in his hand and the rounded silhouette of the man's head looming large in front of him.
You just wait until they find you, Ian Augustine,
hissed the demonic Darenth, stunning Ian with the use of his name.
They'll kill you slow. They'll...
With a simple pull of the trigger, Ian lit up the room and silenced the demon. The moment Ian exited the house, he heard the voice. You did good. Whipping the gun around, Ian trained the sight on the same man he had seen behind the counter at the used bookstore back in Seattle. The name's Turk, said the black man as he flashed a gentle smile. Come with me if you want to meet Ranaji. Ian paused, unsure how to respond. His mind reeled. Ranaji is dead. I visited his grave, he said, as he kept the gun trained on the black man. Tell you what, you put that gun down and come with me if you want your questions answered. What if I had said no? Ian asked as Turk drove. Probably would have made the rest of the afternoon pretty awkward for both of us, came the response. The lump under Turk's coat was definitely big enough to be a gun. So when do I get these answers? Ian asked. The old fisherman, unalterably intent, cold driving rain, said Turk with a grin. What? Ian asked, trying to figure out if he had heard what he thought he heard, or if this odd man was just insane. The old fisherman, unalterably intent, cold driving rain, repeated Turk, this time slower, so that Ian could hear the rhythm of his recitation. Haiku, noted Ian. Turk nodded, impressed. Means what you seek will come in time if you cast your line in the right direction. Their destination was a public park a half hour away. Once there, Turk pointed to a lone man sitting on a bench half a football field away. That's him. Try not to act too surprised. As Ian approached, the overcoat-clad man with the salt and pepper hair looked him up and down. His penetrating stare was like an X-ray scan. From inside the man's coat pocket came a copy of the first book of Infinity. You might know me as Ranaji, but my real name is Gil Mathers. I want you to take every word in here to heart. There is much for me to teach you before it is too late. Your teachings changed my life, Ian told him. I've read everything you've ever written. Not everything. There is one more book, one that I will give you when the time is right. Ian, now that you know my identity, one of my deepest secrets, I am forced to trust you. All Ian could do in response was nod. He was still in shock. I want you to join my army, Ian. There was no hesitation. Yes. As the word fell from Ian's mouth, he felt as if a giant weight was lifted off his shoulders. I'll do anything you ask. Ian's voice was eager. Our quest is about one thing. Killing demons. No, that is only a byproduct of what the Church of Infinity is looking for. I need you to help me find a rare substance, a dark matter of sorts, one that, as the legend goes, is the only remnant of Hell's origin before the cataclysm. By rote, Ian repeated the passage from the 6th book of Infinity. Then came a vast devastation, an apocalyptic event which all but wiped out everything, causing a rift massive enough to fracture this once fertile ancient world into 2 separate dimensions, Hell and Heaven. Mathers continued. That ancient world which existed before ours, the one which somehow destroyed itself and birthed our planet, is known as Origin. Matter from Origin exists in minute quantities buried deep in the earth. Demons have called it Zava since the beginning of time. They need it to cross over into our plane. Ian's head spun with these new revelations. Roniji's books were unclear as to how demons were able to move from Hell to Earth. Now he knew Zava was the answer. Our quest, Ian, is to get our hands on even a small quantity of Zava. Ian furrowed his brow. Why? Because, with it, we'll be able to open a gateway to Hell and kill every demon we find. Hey, this is Mark. You've been listening to part 1 of my new novel, Infinity. You can pick up the next 2 parts as a single download over at my website, wordsushi.com, for just $1.99. I'm an independent artist, and writing and publishing books is what I do for a living. So please support my craft by purchasing my audiobooks and ebooks, and of course, leaving those great 5-star reviews doesn't hurt either. Also, if you've enjoyed listening to Infinity, tell your friends online. And as always, feel free to send me an email at myn@wordsushi.com. This is Mark Yoshimoto Nemcoff, fading to black.